we've reached a point where these wars have gone on so long, and so many people aren't paying attention, that I figured, what the hell, if I can write a book about what the after-war is really like, what these people are, not what they went through over there, but what they're going through here, right now, not only in Kansas, where this book is centered, but in communities across the country, then maybe it's a worthwhile thing to do. Okay, so here's a guy, Adam Schumann, who is rather important in this new book. And for background, I first met Adam Schumann when I was reporting the first book. And again, these guys were on the ground in a tough neighborhood in Baghdad for about 14 months. There was a 15-month deployment, but they were in Iraq for about 14 months. And I was living with them a little over 8 months in order to write a story about what they went through. Again, not a story about the Iraq War, but to use the war to write a more intimate story about what happens to a young man when he's sent into any war, but especially that war at such a time. And one day I was asking around, who's a great soldier? Who do I need to talk to? And I heard this guy Schumann's name. And a week or so later, I went to find him, walked into his room, and that's what I saw. This great soldier, leader of a squad, was a haunted, gaunt-looking man. And I introduced myself, and he said, I guess I know why you're here. I said, well, I'm here to write about you, and because I hear you're a pretty great soldier. He said, well, maybe, but I'm leaving the war. I can't do this anymore. And this was Adam just a few hours before he left to go home. And this is a guy, he was on his third tour. He had been in combat at that point for about 1,000 days. I'm now reading a Rick Atkinson book about World War II. It's a great book, and I just went through a section where they talk about guys who have been in combat for 200 days. They would try to take them off the front line for just a little rest and rehab. Well, you're looking at 1,000 days in combat at that point. And the accumulation of things, he just couldn't do it anymore. And so I stayed with him. And as I wrote in the first book about his leaving the war, his stomach hurt as he made his way across the FOB. He felt himself becoming nauseated. At the landing area, other soldiers from other battalions were lined up. And when the helicopter landed, everyone was allowed to board except him. He didn't understand. Next one's yours, he was told. And when it came in a few minutes later, he realized why he'd had to wait. It had a big red cross on the side. It was the helicopter for the injured and the dead. That was him, Adam Schumann. He was injured, he was dead, he was done. So sometime after the book came out, I stayed in touch with Adam, and he wasn't doing so well. And he's a lot of what prompted the next book. And so, what I want to do here basically is just read parts of the book to you, because the effort here is, I'm not going to teach you anything new. We all know that war hurts people who are in war. It changes them. Sometimes it makes them better, sometimes it makes them worse. It's a defining experience, and we all know that, especially in a setting like this. But this is the current version of an old story, and I care about these people, and I've spent, as I said, 6 years with them, documenting them and writing about them. So if there's a way their stories can penetrate even an audience that knows everything like this audience does, then that's not the worst thing in the world. So I'm going to spend a few minutes telling you some stories about them. This is Adam's wife, Saskia. This is who he came home to mid-deployment, and she was so excited he was coming home because she knew he wasn't doing well, and as soon as he got home, he was going to be fine, and the family was going to be fine. And then she saw him get off the plane and saw him walking across the tarmac, and she got it. They're in for the long haul. Since 9/11, according to the Pentagon, about 2.5 million Americans have joined the various branches of service. 2.5 million. And of those 2.5 million, 2 million have deployed directly into Iraq or Afghanistan. And of the 2 million, according to the best estimates, 1.5 million are fine. They came home. They served, they came home, they're okay. And in some cases, they're better for the experience for having served. But that leaves 500,000 people who have come home or will be coming home with some type of mental wound or psychological wound. And to me, that's a significant number. In the book is a guy named Pete Corelli who ran the Iraq War for a while, came home, was promoted to Vice Chief of Staff of the US Army, and was given the task of taking on mental health issues and the rising suicide rate, and to that end began convening a meeting in the Pentagon once a month, 20 people around the table, video link-ups around the world, and for 2 hours, they would go from link to link where a commanding officer, usually a general, would try to explain a suicide that had happened under his watch. 5 minutes to explain what happened and lessons learned. And one of the most amazing things about these meetings is in 2 hours, they never had time to catch up with what was happening. Okay, there's a guy in the book named Tim Jung, and one of the things the Army did when it became clear that a lot of folks were coming home with having a hard time, the Army set up these things called Warrior Transition Battalions, a special unit to put a soldier in with specialized attention to help him make the transition back to his unit or out of the service and into civilian life. And the book gets into what works with these things and doesn't work with these things. But at Fort Riley, there was a guy named Tim Jung, and he was one of the people in charge of the new arrivals at the WTB. And as I said, the unit where the wounded were sent to recover. Everybody started out with Tim Jung, a friendly, gum-chewing, boyish-looking sergeant first class, who one day, without telling anyone, goes for a drive by himself into the Kansas countryside. 15 miles from the WTB, he pulls into a dirt parking lot area next to the Big Blue River. It's late in the afternoon, and not many people are around, but just to be sure he won't be interrupted, he decides to go to the far side of the river. He climbs an embankment and starts across a long train trestle. If the train comes, there won't be much he can do, but at this point it hardly matters. He has plenty of sleeping pills with him and blank paper on which to write letters to his children. His plan is simple: write the letters, swallow the pills, wade into the river, and let the water take it from there. It's hard to say what has brought him to this point. Probably, like so many cases he's seen at the WTB, it's not one thing in particular, but an accumulation of everything. On the far side now, no train, he'll have to do it himself. He walks south along the river's edge until he finds a place to sit. The air has that damp, moldy smell of mud and ripe leaves, but he doesn't mind it. He takes out the paper and a pen and wonders in his life's last moments what to write of all that has happened. A life of soldiering, a long marriage that failed, a period of cancer treatments. Any one of them could be its own letter, but what he chooses instead for his final words are the thoughts of a father who is proud of his children and knows absolutely that they will go on to accomplish great things. He writes for a while in the stink of the river until he is sure he has written something okay for his children to read and reread in a lifetime of trying to drown out the noise of what he's about to do. And then he gets the pills ready and takes a look around the spot he has chosen. He's looking west into a setting sun that seems to be lighting the river on fire. It is beautiful, he allows himself to think. And as he keeps looking, he takes notice of the river's current, which strikes him as beautiful too. He watches some water bugs skimming along the surface and some birds riding the late afternoon drafts. There are crickets also, pining away in the grasses and weeds. And whereas a few minutes before, he was hearing and seeing none of this, now he sits with pills in hand and letters next to him transfixed. The crickets keep singing. The water keeps moving. The sun keeps dropping. It's beautiful, he keeps thinking. And in that little bit of hesitation, something inside of him turns or recedes or cracks open or does whatever happens when someone no longer wants to die. Because when he at last stands up, it is to go gratefully away from the river, back across the trestle, back home to hide the letters in a drawer, and back to the WTB, where the new arrivals keep coming and coming and coming, all of them headed to the river. Now we have a system in place where people can get help, but anybody in it, good people will tell you that it's an overwhelmed, overtaxed, flawed, inconsistent system. To give you an example, in this book, the guy who was blown up in the Humvee, who pulled the guys out and started having the bad dream, he needed help. So he went into a VA-run PTSD program that was a 7-week program. Another guy, who I didn't describe because I'm running out of time, he also needed help. He wanted to go into that 7-week program, but there was a waiting list. So his caseworker looked around and found him a 4-week program. Okay, might be a good program, but you got 4 weeks or you got 7 weeks. Which one do you want? And then another guy, Adam Schumann, he finally got to the point after a couple of suicide attempts where he needed help. 7 weeks, full. 4 weeks, full. So his caseworker kept looking around and finally found this little program up in Yountville. It's not based on insurance payments, and it's not a VA program. It's this, odd little donor-supported thing. 4 months minimum. 4 months. And Adam Schumann will tell you that bit of luck in his life saved his life.